The history of the hospital at the place called Kisiizi is closely associated with its unique position close to the waterfall. In this year, when we celebrate both the 50th anniversary of the hospital and the inauguration of the latest and largest project to harness the power of the waterfall, it's a good time to look back in words and pictures to the beginnings of the hospital and to earlier attempts to generate power here. The story begins 64 years ago and has its origins in the conflict of the Second World War. In 1944, the British Protectorate government built a factory at Kisiizi to process flax, needed for the war effort to make the linen cords used in parachutes. The labour for the work came from Italian prisoners of war, taken in the fighting against Mussolini's forces when they were driven out of Ethiopia, 1,000 miles to the north of Uganda, in 1942. A stone, inscribed with PWD, standing for Public Works Department, and 1944, commemorated that original building. Today it is out of sight, but it is still built into the wall of one of the rooms at the back of the hospital. From time to time it gets exposed again, as the buildings are refurbished for a change of use. The growing of flax in the area was never a success, because the plants were blighted by a fungal disease called pasmo. The factory ceased to operate, and within a few years the buildings were falling into a state of disrepair. But the potential of the site had not gone unnoticed by Dr. Len Sharp. From his safaris in the region over a period of 30 years as a missionary doctor, with 9 of those as district medical officer for Kisiizi, he would have known of the location long before the flax factory ever came to be built. Living near Kibale, he would have heard about the factory's construction, and the harnessing of the power of the waterfall would have been of particular interest to him. He had himself experimented in a small way with generating electricity from water power at Matana in Burundi, when he was stationed there in 1937. Thus, with all this experience and interest, he was in a unique position to recognize that the Kisiizi site offered huge opportunities. When the flax scheme came to an end, it coincided with a desire being voiced amongst local Christians for a church hospital to be re-established in the region of Kisiizi. The original Kisiizi hospital, seen on the left in this photo, had been in Kibale. It stood on Rugarama Hill, where Kisiizi High School is now, and had started life as this thatched-roofed building in 1923. Later gaining a mabati roof after a nearly disastrous fire, it had been closed in 1940. 14 years later, in 1954, people were looking for a suitable site for a hospital to replace it. Meetings were held and different opinions put forward as to the best place, but Dr. Len was single-minded in his determination that he wanted Kisiizi for the new hospital. He fought almost alone to obtain the various permissions that needed to be given. Eventually, in March 1958, after 3 years of persistence and prayer, the site was granted in a telegram to him from the governor of Uganda. Kisiizi is yours. So began the transformation of the flax factory to a church hospital. When the site was taken over, the machinery of the factory was still mostly intact, and Len and his son John, here seen with grandson Andrew, made use of everything as they reconstructed the buildings for their new purpose. Some demolition was needed. The building on tall pillars in the top left corner of this photo stood where the outpatient block is now. It was probably for storing the harvested flax plants brought to the factory. It was first stripped of its tiles and then pulled down. All the materials were carefully recovered and reused. What pieces of unusable machinery there were found new use as reinforcement in the concrete cover to the water channel that ran behind the main building. At the top of the waterfall, where water was taken off from the river to power the factory, things looked then much as they have done ever since, at least until the modifications of the past 2 years. The new machine, which is inaugurated this year, takes very much more water than any of the previous hydro installations. In fact, it is capable of taking all the water flowing in the river in the drier months of the year, so that the waterfall could have been shut off altogether. To prevent this ever happening, a compensatory flow has been arranged by boring a hole through the original dam wall, so that some flow over the fall is always guaranteed. Cutting this hole was a dangerous undertaking, and its safe achievement by hospital workmen is a tribute to their bravery and skill. The new generator needs to be able to run alongside the older one, and this has meant a radical redesign of the channel so that it now splits into two on the hillside above the hospital. The channel which supplies water to the new turbine is also cleverly constructed to be progressively deeper and wider. This makes the flow of water slow down. Silt and stones can settle to the bottom and not get carried to the turbine, where they would cause serious damage. The original flax factory was equipped with 3 water turbines in all, which were mostly used to drive the scutching machines that extracted the linen fibres from the stems of the flax plants. Other similar flax factories existed in the first half of the 20th century, like this one in Ireland. Prior to scutching, the harvested flax needed to be carefully soaked or retted to soften the plant stems, usually for about 9 days. Too long in the water and the fibres rotted, too short and the pulp around the fibres was not soft enough. Retting was a very smelly business, so the valley would not have been a very pleasant place in the days of the factory. The need to treat the flax in this way explains the presence of the ponds that later came to be used as fish ponds. Ownership of them never passed to the church with the rest of the site, and was a source of some disappointment in the early days of the hospital. Of the power produced by the 3 water wheels, it is likely that some was used to generate electricity, in addition to powering the scutching machines, because there is a light bulb to be seen hanging in the factory main building. It fell to Dr. Len, however, to be the first to attempt to generate significant amounts of electricity, something he attempted to do by harnessing together the power of 2 of the original 3 turbines. The 2 he used were Pelton wheels, and he connected them together with a long shaft which ran along the now concrete-covered water channel. This arrangement was somewhat crude, and it withstood neither the test of time nor the test of him not being there to keep it running. There was prolific construction work in those first years of creating the hospital, and within a couple of years the hospital quickly took on the appearance that became so familiar to many for years to come. Not until 1971, however, did Kisiizi acquire its first proper, tailor-made hydroelectric generating set. It came as a gift to the hospital from a Rotary Club in Canada, and was made by a company in Kendal, Cumbria. Unfortunately, when it arrived at the hospital, there was no way of carefully lifting the heavy crate off the lorry that transported it, and instead it was simply pushed off and fell to the ground. Sadly, this caused the main shaft to be bent, and getting it straightened not only caused long delays in getting the set running, but also meant that throughout its life, the lack of trueness in the shaft necessitated very frequent servicing. Another disappointment came from the fact that it did not generate as much electricity as it was supposed to, and there was still barely enough power even to light the hospital. This scene from the operating theatre in 1981 shows how few electrical appliances were used. Not long after the time of this photo, the reason for this was tracked down to the fact that the pipes bringing water to the turbine, and these were the original flax factory ones, now 40 years old, were so furred up that they were almost blocked. Once this diagnosis had been made, new pipes were obtained, and from then on the full power output was at last achieved. Some staff houses even started to have electric kettles. Yet even this increased power did not match the expanding hospital's need, and it became plain that a bigger turbine was required. By happy coincidence, a retired Swedish engineer, Einar Eskilsson, became interested in the possibilities of producing more power at Kisiizi, and he single-handedly raised the £120,000 needed for the project he put forward. Using a machine from the same manufacturer in Cumbria, the new installation was commissioned in 1984. This time, very great care was taken to ensure that none of the setbacks which beset its predecessor were repeated, and this care has been repaid amply by 24 years of virtually non-stop electrical generation. Keeping the hospital supplied with electricity depends very much on keeping the generating sets and distribution network well maintained. Over the years, numerous people have contributed their expertise in servicing and repairing. In recent years, however, this responsibility, which is a heavy burden, has increasingly been taken by the resident hospital electricians, and it is to a large extent upon their shoulders that the success of the latest scheme will depend. When the new machine had run so long that the nozzle and the water wheel itself needed replacing, it was mostly local skill that did the job. The replacement of the water wheel had threatened to be prohibitively expensive, until, again by happy coincidence, a hardly used wheel which was being scrapped was found at a waterworks in Wales. It was donated free of charge to the hospital, and after some small modifications in the Uganda railway workshop in Kampala was installed for use. By the late 1980s and 90s, life at Kisiizi had been transformed by the availability of electricity. There were computers and street lamps, electric saws and planers in the wood workshop, and every kind of medical device. A glimpse inside the same operating theatre at the turn of the millennium shows a very different picture to that taken in 1981, with many electrical appliances in use as two patients are operated upon simultaneously. By 2001, this growth in electricity demand yet again threatened to outstrip the power available, and a program of electricity rationing had to be introduced. Each staff house was wired up with a device that limited the power that could be taken. Other devices automatically switched off appliances which consume a lot of power if the generator was close to being overloaded. Introducing all these things stemmed the frequency of blackouts for another few years, but the need for an even bigger generator had again become obvious. And this is the generator which is inaugurated in this year, the 50th Jubilee year of the founding of the hospital. The hope is that not only will it provide, with the still serviceable previous machine, sufficient electricity for the hospital compound, but that through the sale of electricity to surrounding centres, the finances of the hospital will be helped. Utilising the re-engineered works done on the dam and channel, the new turbine is sited adjacent to the previous machine. The pipe laid 25 years previously to replace the blocked flax factory pipes was exposed and had to be removed as it crossed the foundation pit of the new machine. The pipes for the new turbine have been sourced from Dar es Salaam, whilst the turbine and generator are from Germany and the control gear from Canada. All the installation work has been carried out by workers employed by the hospital and under the leadership of Charles Swainson. This has greatly saved on the cost of the project, which has been generously subsidised by the government of Uganda as part of its rural electrification scheme. Power is going to be exported to Upper Kisiizi Trading Centre and along the road toward Rubali as far as Nyarashangi. It is all a long way from the rudimentary beginnings of Dr. Len's attempts at producing electricity, but he would surely be pleased at the way things have been carried forward since his early endeavours, and pleased not only that the generation of electricity has been carried forward, but also that the medical and spiritual care, which have been the hallmark of Kisiizi from its beginning, have been sustained through these 50 years. The waterfall, source of all the mechanical power at Kisiizi, has long been a vivid reminder of that other source of power, God's power, which ever flows to transform the hearts of needy men and women who avail themselves of it. The need for this spiritual power, this water of life, is no less today than it was 50 years ago. And so the story of Kisiizi, its hospital and its waterfall, is not ended. There is work yet to be done, and in this Jubilee year we need to redouble our efforts to press forward.